Okay, let's get started. Clearly, we'll start the day with Stephen. He's coming all the way from Austin. Let me say it correct this time. Often I say, when I introduce him, he's coming from Houston. Well, it's close, it's still in Texas, but not exactly the same city. So we started the third day of the conference with Stephen, who was one of the very early adopters of BizTalk Server. And you would have most likely heard of him as a driving force behind BizTalk Gurus. When I started back in 2004 with BizTalk, already that platform was available back then. And that's probably also, gave him that MVP title that he's holding for 17 plus years, something like that. Yeah, amazing. So in this session, Stephen is going to highlight the key factors around moving from BizTalk Server to Azure, thereby analyzing various migration scenarios. So please welcome Stephen Thomas.
Well, thank you, Lex. As he said, my name is Stephen Thomas, and I guess I consider myself now kind of an Azure solution integration architect. It's kind of hard to really pinpoint a title for a lot of us nowadays. I will say that I'm super excited to have made it up here on stage with you today. Ever since Monday, I've been having these nightmares that somehow I trip coming right up there. So I did make it up here, so that's one victory for today. As Lex mentioned, I'm going to talk about getting started, migrating from BizTalk to Azure. I am very happy I did not have to go after Sandro's talk yesterday. So give us some time to kind of process that. So that's victory 2. So I'm already, up 2 right now, and it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been consulting for over 22 years now. 18 years of those I've actually worked for myself. And I mentioned this to somebody on Monday, and they said, wow, it must be great. You don't have a boss for 18 years. And I'm like, yeah, but my wife's the CFO. And if you think your company is bad looking at your expense reports, my wife wouldn't pay me back for extra cheese on a Subway sub. She said it wasn't healthy. So there's pluses and minuses working for yourself. I've been working with BizTalk since it first came out in 2021. I've been working with Azure for over 10 years now. I started off diving deep into virtual machines. I used to talk about virtual machines at conferences. I apologize to anybody that had to sit through those. I've since moved past the virtual machines. I'm now highly focused on logic apps and how that can help broaden our integration solutions. And I've been working with logic apps for over 5 years now. And as I mentioned, a 17-year Microsoft MVP. So with that, I want to kind of start with some opening thoughts. And I added this slide late last night based on kind of some of the stuff we saw in some of the other sessions. One of the best things that I like about this conference is you get both the Microsoft approach to things for about a day and a half, and then you get a day and a half of listening to real-world consultants that actually live and breathe this stuff every day. I've been doing client solutions for over 20 years. I think pretty much every presenter has been at least 10 years of integration experience. So we bring the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's important that we highlight all aspects of an integration scenario. I personally like the bad and the ugly more than the good because I can learn from other people's past experiences. So I definitely I'm open to all constructive feedback about your solutions, what you've ran into in the past, and we like to see how others can share their experiences as well. With that, all technologies are going to have pluses and minuses. I'm definitely not up here trying to sell you on getting rid of your BizTalk and moving to Azure. That's not what this session's about. But I will tell you that after 15 years of having to reinstall every BizTalk DLL assembly to change a schema, just uploading that into our integration account is kind of life-changing. So there are definitely some huge benefits in leveraging both BizTalk and Azure together or moving to Azure altogether. This session has always been focused more about empowering you as a developer or as an architect to really learn all about the full range of Microsoft offering on the integration space so that you can really deliver the best solutions for your client and your enterprise. So keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of go through this session. So with that, I want to start with a quote from Socrates. And it's the only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. Now, this quote has always stuck with me ever since college because I had to write a draft essay on this very quote. And nothing can really be further from the truth, especially when you're looking at the breadth of offerings from the Azure space. If you approach it as, I know nothing about functions, I know nothing about data lakes, and really dive in and actively look to learn something new, it's a great way to both broaden your skills and be able to build better solutions. So with that, feel free to contact me anytime. I can be reached at steven@stevenwthomas.com, also on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So let me get started by talking a little bit about my current project, and it was a big driving factor for wanting to put together this presentation. The client I'm at is doing a massive BizTalk migration. They're taking every single one of their thousands of BizTalk interfaces and moving them in some way, shape, or form to the Azure platform. They're doing a full big bang migration. They looked at this in terms of, they were looking at upgrading from BizTalk 2013 to BizTalk 2020 and the costs associated with retesting all their interfaces and paying for the license upgrades and new hardware. And then they compared that with the cost of totally replatforming everything and moving it into Azure integration space. The initial ROI was definitely not there in year 1 or 2, but as they spread it out over 5 years, they were hoping to reap some costs from making this move. Their end-all goal is total shutdown of their multi-server BizTalk environment. So at the end of their migration, they're going to pull the plug and there is no more BizTalk. I've been on this project for almost a year now. It started about a year before I got there, and we probably still have a full another year to go before they're fully able to pull the plug on their BizTalk server. They did have to do a large upfront investment in order to get started with this kind of big bang approach. And that's simply because they needed to train their staff, they needed to hire additional resources, and they needed to build out the infrastructure in terms of express routes to support the latency requirements they had for their solutions. Now, while they made this big investment and they were able to sell it to the business, this is definitely not what I see as a common approach for looking at migrating your BizTalk solutions into the cloud. Don't think that this is the way you have to go. So what have I talked about in some of the past years at these Integrate conferences? Back 4 years ago, in 2008, I talked about how BizTalk can be made better by integrating it with some Azure services, the out-of-the-box components that are supported by BizTalk. I ran on a campaign of making BizTalk Server great again, and that was successful for a little while. And we can all say that, BizTalk and Azure play well together, and there's definitely scenarios that support that. There still is scenarios that are going to be hybrid, that are going to be BizTalk and Azure together, and that always will be important going forward. I guarantee 10 years from now, someone will call me and say, I have my BizTalk 2020 running with Azure, calling logic apps, come help me out. And that will still be there, and that'll be a valid scenario. When it comes to hybrid versus migration, I kind of tend to blend the two together. Kind of tends to be a fine line. Unless you're doing like my current project where they're doing the big bang migration, you'll probably end up in some sort of hybrid scenario before you end up finally maybe not deciding turning off your BizTalk servers the right way to go. Really the key is to understand that migration, totally turning off BizTalk, is definitely not the right solution for everybody. They're like 20 years from now, I'll get a call and there'll be still somebody running BizTalk 2006 and need help with that. And sure enough, there is people still running BizTalk 2000 out there. So migration is not going to be for everyone. But why is now kind of the right time to think about moving past a hybrid solution and doing a full migration and turning off your BizTalk server? There's a lot of new and upcoming features that we see in Logic App Standard today that adds a lot of things that were missing in the past. So the past 4 years, it was kind of more about let's work together. Now it's like we're working together, that's great, that might be the right path, but now we might have a chance to save additional money by making additional efforts in the cloud. And it's really about what's the best way for you guys to solve your business problems. Definitely not saying migration is the right path, definitely not saying BizTalk only is the right path. It's understanding all the tool sets available to you and then moving forward with what's right for your business. So let's talk about this session a little bit. I'm going to share with you the 2 secrets to BizTalk migration. As I was practicing last night, I was like, 2 secrets, it kind of sounds like an infomercial. And if you woke up at 4 in the morning here in the UK, they love their infomercials. Mattress toppers, apparently is a big deal. And then killing weeds with heat. I know we don't do that in the States. So, but I'm going to share with you the 2 secrets to doing a BizTalk migration. First is to build courage. Build the courage in yourself to jump out and learn all the new integration features available on the Microsoft platform. And the next is attacking the problem. It's having that courage, selling it to your business, and going out and making that happen. So let's talk about building courage first. So my opening song was Eye of the Tiger. I couldn't come up with anything that was Eye of a Lion. So Tiger was as close as we could get. So first step is going to build courage. So why you? Why are we the right people to make this push in our enterprise? Is there anyone here that considers themselves an Azure developer with no BizTalk experience? Perfect. Can I ask you a question? How excited are you to jump in and learn to do BizTalk? Not very excited. Right answer. So I found the Azure experts just aren't excited about jumping in and learning BizTalk Server. It's great. Good thing you said that. I don't know what I had done if you didn't say that. Is anyone here that's a BizTalk person, expert, developer, whatever, who has no Azure experience? Perfect. How excited are you to learn about Azure? Very excited. Perfect. Love it. I find that BizTalk people are excited to learn about Azure. Maybe it's because some of us have literally spent 10 years dragging a line from one side of a mapper to the other side. And sometimes when I'm bored, I'll go the other way. But I did find that caused some problems, so I have to go left to right. But we're all excited about this. We're passionate about this. And that's what makes everyone here, even if you don't have the BizTalk experience, you can pair up with a buddy. It makes all of us here in prime position to really learn and drive this forward in your enterprise. So how do you empower yourself? So the number one question I've gotten over the past year goes like this. It's from, I'm a BizTalk expert, developer. How do I learn Azure? How do I learn to be better at doing what I'm doing? And it was kind of easy with BizTalk. We got what we got out of the box. We know we had the orchestration engine, rules engine, BAM, some stuff like that. It was very easy to understand the components we had to work with. Well, Azure has over 200 products and services that we get to pick from now. That's a lot of different components. Now, they bundle things together as Azure integration services, but that doesn't mean you're limited to that set of Azure features by any means. You can leverage anything that's going to help you build a better solution. So it's definitely easy to get overwhelmed, and some people have no idea even where to start. So I always suggest start with the BizTalk supported features. These are the features that if you're going to build a hybrid solution, you're going to need to know. If you want to build solutions independently, a lot of these will work well with that as well. So first and foremost, you want to start with logic apps. Then you want to learn Service Bus, blob storage, and then Event Hub. These are the 4 key areas that play really well with BizTalk Server. Now, once you move past that, I get into what I call kind of supporting features. These are features you're going to need to know to really build an enterprise-grade integration solution in the cloud. And these consist of integration accounts, WCF relay, API management, Key Vault, functions, on-premise data gateway, and Event Grid. And just as important as remembering the names is remembering the logos. There's a lot of times, like we saw with Sandro's presentation, where in the designer, you don't see very much. They show you the logo, but they don't really tell you what things are, especially when you get with some of the connectors. You'll see a logo, and I have to be like, what the heck is that? So I always throw out the logos so we can help understand, but visually, how Microsoft represents these components. So I would say there's 3 focus areas that everyone should look at. Logic apps being the first one. Next is going to be Service Bus, which is going to be our queuing. And last is going to be API management. And API management is something that, to be honest, I work with every day. and I probably only use 2% of the features of API management. It is, I wish I knew a lot more about it. I know nothing about it, so I'm passionate to learn more, but it's extremely powerful. In some scenarios, if you're migrating from BizTalk to the cloud, API management will totally replace everything you're doing in your orchestration. And it's just that powerful in the things it can do. So how do you go about learning more? If you want to jump in and be a thought leader in your enterprise, where do you start? Well, I always recommend starting with the AZ-204 exam. I think that's the current name. They renamed it. Hopefully that's the current one. And this is around developing solutions for Microsoft Azure. Now, there's a good Udemy course on this. I like the Udemy course because it's usually value priced. You usually find a coupon. I think I got a lifetime license for like $7 or something like that. It tends to be updated often, but any training partner out there that provides a course around this exam, I think is an amazing place to start. I like this because it covers at a high level, functions, virtual machines, storage, kind of the things that you need to know at the ground level to start understanding how to play in the Azure space. If you move past them, there's a place called acloud.guru, and they were recently purchased by Pluralsight. The reason I like them is they have a lot of good hands-on labs, and their learning paths tend to be a little more mature and more refined than some of the other places I've seen out there. So they definitely have content centered around these exams. You don't have to actually take the exams. It's just getting the content around the exams that's going to be useful, and they can be a good place to help. There's always Pluralsight as well. I have 4 courses out there. Some of them are slightly dated. 3 are solely focused on logic apps, and 1 more on enterprise messaging, where I go into service bus and stuff in there as well. Pluralsight does have a lot of free weekends and free trials, so it makes it nice to be able to try this stuff out for free. And they have a lot of learning paths as well, but their learning paths tend to be like 30 or 40 hours long, as compared to like the Udemy course, which is 12 hours. Some of the Pluralsight courses tend to be a little dated as well, going back even years past where my courses are dated. Now, if you want in-person learning, many of us are probably familiar with QuickLearn. They were kind of one of the first BizTalk-focused in-person learning centers for BizTalk. They have amazing curriculum. I see that they are creating an Azure integration services course. They didn't have a syllabus up yet, so it must still be in the works. But the great thing about them is it's a 40-hour-long course, and it's generally half labs and half lecture. So you don't really spend the whole time just listening to somebody talk. They also will come on site, do private classes if you have a big demand in your company. I also have put together an 8-hour instructor-led course. It's ran through BizTalk 360. It's kind of more focused on BizTalk 2020 hybrid options. So I'll start with the 4 core features that integrate well with BizTalk, and then I move on to the supporting features. We run the course about every 3 or 4 months. So if you're interested in that, you can get in contact with BizTalk 360 for that. And there's also in-person and on-site for me or any of the other MVPs. I know Sandro does it as well. We're definitely willing to jump in and help you guys learn and get your company up to speed on where they need to be for the new way of doing integration. Now, it's easy to get confused. And I know myself, I've done a very poor job explaining some of these complex topics to people that don't have a lot of experience in the Azure platform. The first one that everyone gets stuck up on is consumption versus standard. And the easiest way to think of this is don't worry about it, especially if you're learning. Jump in with consumption because it's ultra cheap and you get to play around with it, and you can build pretty powerful solutions. All of my customers from the past, going back, actually every customer I've worked with has went with the consumption model, even for production. That said, more investments seem to be made on the standard side of things. All of us BizTalk people, we've been complaining for how many years that we want a persistentless orchestration. We want high latency, don't save anything. Well, they finally gave us that in standard. Now, it's not an orchestration, logic apps, a little bit different. There's different rules if you're going persistence free, but we now have that option where we didn't have that option before. So I say start consumption. If you're going to make a larger investment or build a team, build a project, think of doing actual full migrations, then you'd want to look at doing a standard approach. Tool of choice for development. I've seen architects scream and yell at each other all day saying, you need to use VS Code, you need to use Visual Studio. And you know, at the end of the day, it all boils down to an ARM template that you use for deployment. I tend to lead with the portal just because it's so simple. I can pull up any logic app, see it in the portal, and don't have to worry about downloading code locally. So don't get hung up on what tool to use and actually do in your development. CI/CD. It's hard no matter how you look at it, whether you use ARM templates via DevOps or you use some other tool. Don't get stuck up on that. It's definitely important to every solution, but I would focus on learning the basics first and then focusing on the DevOps approach to your deployment after you have kind of all the basics down. And now I'll kind of share with you some notes that I have from my past years of working with Azure from a beginner's point of view. The one thing I found is the only thing consistent is inconsistency. So you'll find every time you log into the portal, something's different, a color's changed, an icon's moved, new features pop up. You never really know what you're gonna see. It's kind of like a surprise every single day. It's like you log in and guaranteed something will be new. So plan for the inconsistency. Naming standards matter. And as we saw yesterday, every component inside of Azure has their own naming standard. And it's definitely annoying that you can't have a global naming standard for your solutions. But a lot of us didn't have that in BizTalk either. A lot of us had, you know, this is what we call schema, this is what we call map, this is what we call trading partner. We kind of developed our own naming standard per artifact as we went along. So I would say the same goes for your Azure solutions. Just make sure you have a naming standard. And like I say to all my BizTalk customers, the only, the only wrong naming standard is to not have a naming standard. So there's some samples that Microsoft has out there that you can see. Sorry, excuse me. I didn't think I'd actually carry my allergies from Austin all the way here to London, but it did happen. So sorry about that. So you want to define a naming standard. Next, as I kind of mentioned, building your solution only gets you half of the way there. You still have to worry about your deployments and your integration and your automated testing. So just, it's important to claim victory that, hey, I got my solution working, but you still have a lot of work to go to kind of make it enterprise grade. I found that more than one Microsoft account causes a whole host of problems. I work with multiple clients, so I log into different Microsoft portals with different credentials, and yeah, it messes everything up. And as Nino mentioned yesterday, if you have a personal account, again, not a good approach, and that messes everything up as well. So keep that in mind as well. Always use a company account. Architecture in Azure is important, but it's not just the only piece of the puzzle. So in terms of BizTalk, architecture was key. In terms of Azure, architecture and pricing tends to be key. You have to make sure you keep the price of your solution in mind when you're actually building it. So are you going to use enterprise-grade dedicated service bus versus non-dedicated? And a lot of these things have extremely high price differences when you look at the SKUs. And something else to keep in mind is not everything comes out of preview. So most things do now, but back in the olden days when we were first starting with Logic Apps, you know, things would come in preview and they'd come out of preview and go away and stay in preview for years. And make sure if you do use preview features, what that means to your enterprise. Some enterprises don't allow preview features, support is different, there may be compliance and regulatory issues as well using any sort of preview feature. So, along with building our integration skills, I feel we're all going to be Azure pricing architects. It's an important piece of building an Azure puzzle, and it's hard to answer pricing questions. Going to be our job of the future. And I've learned from experience that telling the business that you don't know what the price is going to be is definitely not the right answer. Yeah, that doesn't go well. There's some estimating tools out there that you can use to kind of help gauge the price. What gets confusing is everything says, oh, plus storage, or oh, plus bandwidth. And I have no idea the best way to estimate what my storage is and my bandwidth is going to be. So it's always best to come up with the best estimate you can. make sure you have something in mind, because guaranteed the business is going to ask you, what's this going to cost? Something else to keep in mind is the pricing changes every now and then. So what you see today might be higher or even less tomorrow. When you do your development, you might want to look for developer-based priced resources. Integration accounts is a good example where they have a developer tier of that. The limitation is you can only have, I think, 2 parties and 1 agreement. So if you need anything more than that for like a demo, it's not gonna cut it. So definitely look for developer price tools. And that said, not all developer items are cheap. There's, I believe, a developer instance of the ICE environment, but it's still fairly expensive on a day-to-day basis, something like $300 a month, if I remember right. And something else that Azure services, features, and even prices can vary by region. I think Microsoft kind of mentioned it on Monday that they roll out features first in a couple regions, then more regions after that. So keep in mind, depending on the region you pick, you might be constrained around what Azure features you have available. Okay, and keep in mind that unlike BizTalk Server, Azure is always changing. So we can forget about the 3-year release cycles that we saw with BizTalk, and we're down to more like 3-week release cycles with components in Azure. So with that, we can jump into attacking the problem. And I found a nice picture of lions on the prowl here. So why even think about Azure migrations to begin with? Well, the overall goal would be to lower or remove upgrade and software assurance costs. So overall to save money for the business and provide an equal, if not better, experience in terms of what the business is getting at the end of the day. Sometimes it's about increased security. Last year I talked about some of the early integrators, some of the first messaging solutions that we had out there that involved messaging pigeons that would send messages all around. Their biggest security concern was a hawk. You want to talk about losing a message, it'd be gone forever. So while we don't have many instances of hawks attacking BizTalk Server today, the hawks come in different forms. Generally, it comes in the form of Windows security updates that kind of destroy your BizTalk environment. So not having to worry about those kinds of things in our environment is definitely a huge load of burden off of us as integrators. And it tends to always be, well, it's an infrastructure problem, they call us first, right? BizTalk stopped working, why is no messages running? Well, did you test the patch first? Well, no, we just installed it. So it tends to be our problem. Moving to Azure, can mitigate some of that. Other reasons is to reduce or remove on-premise resources. We get to replace things like text config files that are sitting across multiple servers, FTP endpoints, file drops. Everybody here probably has a reverse proxy. We get to replace those in Azure with features that are hopefully more secure than what our own teams can develop. We have things like Password Vault, which can be shared subscription-wide, service bus queues, which is extremely reliable, amazing service, and relatively cheap. And then API management, which can serve as kind of our reverse proxy in the Azure space. So what are some of these different architecture scenarios? So what are our attack options in terms of looking at moving to the cloud? Well, first, there's kind of the hardware lift and shift. And other people have talked about this yesterday. Simply moving your VMs into the cloud definitely gives you some benefits in terms of no rework, no additional costs out of your pocket, essentially. You have to do some testing, but there's no code rework. It's easy to scale the VMs. You need additional power out of them. You can't take full advantage to all the infrastructure side of components in Azure, and it allows you to help reduce your on-prem resources. I see clients taking this approach if they're doing a serverless, a data center-less approach to their IT infrastructure. Is anybody here actually doing an initiative to have no servers on your data center, have no data center? Or so, a couple. So those scenarios where it would make a lot of sense. You don't want to necessarily migrate, but you want to get rid of your servers. Obviously, the disadvantage to this, you still have your licensing costs associated with BizTalk. And more importantly, you have the time restrictions in terms of having support for that BizTalk environment. The next scenario is kind of new development only. tends to be the most common. New development only tends to kind of migrate into a eventual hybrid or a full migration scenario kind of down the road. It's kind of the best way to get in and start learning about how to build Azure integration solutions in your enterprise. So that's basically essentially new work is done in Azure. The downside of this is you still have to maintain 2 environments. It doesn't solve your problem when your time expires on your support for your BizTalk environment. And then you do have to eventually handle what happens when BizTalk goes out of date. Benefits of this is definitely the easiest to sell to your boss and others in the enterprise. And it allows you to move and analyze your existing code and move it at your own pace. Once people see the benefits and potential cost savings, a lot of times they get excited and want to move additional resources. And then the last of the 3 architecture scenarios is really when it comes time to upgrade BizTalk. This is what happened to my current client I'm at now. They did the analysis and decided the big bang migration approach was going to work for them. This involves a full rework of all your BizTalk components and essentially mapping them to components in Azure integration space. Generally, you start with the critical resources first to make sure they get in the cloud and are going to work successfully, and then move other resources as time permits. Benefits of this, you get full access to all the features in the Azure platform, whether it's scalability, whether it's reliability, whether it's easy DR. I'll say easy compared, that's kind of in quotes. Allows you to retire your on-premise assets completely, shut off your BizTalk server, and it gives you the ability to fully grow as much as you need, leveraging the full power of the Azure infrastructure. And then as you put more and more components in Azure, you actually get the benefit of maybe getting potentially better discounts from Microsoft. Kind of the more you spend, the better the discount's going to be. So that's a plus as well. Although it's hard to sell to the CTO saying, wow, let's spend $1 million a month and get the best discount. I don't know how that conversation would go, probably not well. So what it's really about is finding the right balance that's going to work in your enterprise. And it's about how do you model your current integration scenario in Azure? Is it going to be, a logic app with service bus queues? Is it going to be pure messaging solution and service bus? And it's going to be different for everybody. So some of the pluses is there's some artifact reuse. We can reuse schemas, including flat file schemas. So if you're doing EDI, your flat file schemas are still going to work. In some cases, you can reuse maps even with external assemblies. Project I'm on is consumption-based, full reuse of almost all their maps. Now, all of them had to have modifications done, but it's trivial compared to actually redoing the maps from scratch. Some of them are very complex. They have hundreds and hundreds of maps in their overall solution. There's trading partners and agreements. I've not necessarily found a tool that does a direct conversion, but the look and feel of the interfaces are very similar. So if you look at your BizTalk solution, it's very easy to recreate those inside your integration account. Same with orchestrations. There is a converter tool. I'm not a fan of any sort of automated converter. I am a fan of using your existing orchestrations as a start for your workflow solutions in Logic Apps. So there's a lot of things that are optimized, done a little bit differently in Logic Apps. So a lot of times you can enhance and make your orchestrations more streamlined, leveraging some of the new abilities inside of Logic Apps. So again, finding the right balance. These are the key factors that will influence your solution. First and foremost is your existing components. So what are you dealing with today? Next is disaster recovery. So with BizTalk, it was a very well-known disaster recovery approach. You had another server running in a different data center. You would do log shipping. With components in Azure Integration Services, it's a little more complex. Mostly because every component does DR a little bit differently, and some components require you to have premium SKUs to do DR, which again can really boost your cost of your solution. But if you build your solution with full ARM templates for deployment, it should be relatively quick to deploy that new solution into a different region in the event that you need to do so. So that's kind of the approach my existing client is doing. They have a full DR plan, but there's really nothing there in that other region that they've identified as their DR. So that's where budget comes into play as well. What level of SKU do you use? Do you need 100 megabyte message support and service bus? If so, you have to use a dedicated instance, things like that. So budget and it will definitely play a factor. Latency requirements, that's important as well. If you have an express route, it's going to give you best connectivity between your Azure solution and your on-premise systems if you still have them. My client does. They have many on-premise systems, so they needed that low latency, so they have a good express route set up. And then your overall security. So can you have data in the cloud? Is there regulatory concerns and restrictions against having that data move in the cloud? Can you only have certain data in the cloud? So all that will come into play in finding the right balance of building an integration solution. And then something else is it's not always one-to-one. So an orchestration doesn't map to a logic app. An orchestration is going to map to a logic app with service bus and storage. And something like a trading partner and EDI solution, that's not going to be one-to-one. That's going to use Key Vault for your certificate store. It's going to use integration accounts. It's going to use logic app, service bus, and probably other components of Azure kind of all together. So really what it's about is integration reimagined. So it's really up to you to learn about the features available and apply them as best you can for your enterprise and help building the best integration solution that you can. So call to action, quite simple. Build courage. Let's get out there and learn everything we can about the integration components that we might leverage in our existing solutions. Then attack the problem. Go out there and build components, think about hybrid solutions, think about if migration is the right answer, and maybe it's not. Maybe you're very happy and content with BizTalk, and that's fantastic as well. Contact me anytime, Steven@StevenWThomas.com. Is there any questions? Yes?
So we talked about the maps and the orchestration. What about the pipeline components?
So the question is, we talked about maps and orchestrations. How do we model pipeline components? It kind of depends. There's a document that kind of goes through artifact by artifact on how best to Microsoft recommends modeling components. I don't remember their solution for pipeline components. Sometimes it can be a logic app if you're doing like flat file disassembly. If you're doing debatching, logic apps, a lot of them support debatching rate in the trigger itself if you have an XML message coming in. So it kind of depends on what you're doing in that pipeline component. Hopefully you're not loading the message in the DOM and doing some sort of manipulation, because we know that's bad. But it will depend on what you're doing. But I would say there's a Microsoft document. I can send you the link if you email me.
Sure, that's fine. Just a follow-up question.
Yep.
Regarding the performance, so when we talk about the LOB systems, let's say we are integrated with SAP, which is a huge system. We have seen BizTalk provide some sort of host throttling, then we can manage to keep the rate control. Otherwise, we have to implement some custom. But in terms of logic app, do we have such options so that we can limit the rate at which we are pushing to destination?
So my current client uses polling-based approach for reading a message out of a service bus queue, and they only read a certain amount of messages at a time. So that's one approach. You can also set concurrency executions on logic apps. So you can say, I don't know if it's on all of them, they might vary by trigger. But you can say, I only want 10 instances of this logic app running at a time, or I only want one instance of this logic app running at a time. So those are some of the options you have to slow it down.
Right, because is from real world example, we have seen the performance that BizTalk SAP adapter was giving, logic app was not matching that. So
yeah, there's been a lot of debate, I don't know, debate's the right word, a lot of talk around the SAP components in logic apps, and my client leverages the SAP stuff extensively, and they don't run into any issues. Right. They did use the on-premise data gateway for either receiving or sending. They got better performance that way than actually using the logic app connector. Right. So I would hope to see when we move to standard that there's hopefully some improvements there.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. Yep.
You're showing us the one-to-one migrations, right? But what about re-architecture? Maybe make it more API-based or event-based. Using the capabilities of Azure instead of mirroring the capabilities of BizTalk?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you approach looking at really leveraging the new components of Azure instead of making it a BizTalk, just BizTalk redone in Logic Apps, right? And that's a good question, and that's where you come into learning all the different components of Azure and what the event grid can give you and what the API management can give you. And I think there's a lot of components that will go away in your BizTalks. If you do a full re-architecture, API management will be a heavy component in probably many solutions, as well the eventing infrastructure. So it's definitely going to vary highly by client. So shoot me an email, we can talk about it specifically. But that's a great question. That definitely looking at ways to just not make it BizTalk-like in Azure is going to get you tremendous.
My first option, re-architecture and make the best out of Azure instead of just mirroring BizTalk.
Yeah, exactly. It's harder to sell to the business because there's generally a higher cost associated with that, but I would imagine you'd have improved latency and improved performance with that kind of approach. And that's what I would say is the right way to do it, is to look at a re-architecture leveraging everything. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Following up on his session, you might have noticed that we have written this migration book. It describes, of course, migration from versions BizTalk 2013 and later until 2020. But besides that, it also discusses migration scenarios to Azure. So if you would be interested, you can check out the book at our booth. Thank you.
Cove.co